Hallo, welkom allemaal bij How Crypto Will Save the Planet. Ik ben Tonya Sudiono, de presentator, en ik zit hier met Elisa Achterberg en met Kevin Owocki, and we'll switch to English now because he's from the US. Let's see if we can connect with him. In the meantime, maybe I'll start introducing Elisa. She has a master in econometrics. Oh, hey, Kevin, there you are. I was just introducing Elisa. So Elisa has a background in econometrics, and she also founded the Circular Finance Lab. But in between, she also worked on permaculture as a designer, which we will dive into a little bit more later. Kevin Owocki then, he is the founder of Gitcoin, as you can see by his shirt. Welcome. And
so good to be here.
yeah, so we're going to talk about crypto today and also ask ourselves, could this be an option of changing the world in a more sustainable version of what it is today? Kevin will also have a short presentation, and we'll have a chat with the three of us as well. But first, I was really curious just to know a little bit, is there anyone in the audience who is familiar with crypto? Okay, that's good to know. There are a few people I don't know. Kevin, can you see the audience?
Yeah, the camera seems to be toggling around, but when the cameraman focuses on the audience, I could see people. So, hey, it's great to see everyone. Wish I was there with you in person.
Cool. So let's start off first with, I was curious, Elisa, you started with econometrics, but now you founded this Circular Finance Lab. How did you come about in founding that?
Thank you so much for the nice introduction. It's really an honor for me to be here, actually. When they asked me for this event, I directly said yes, because this is such an exciting topic, I think. And a few weeks later, I started doubting about it, because I was like, crypto, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, and I'm not bankless at all. I work with financial institutions every day. And so I'm not very up-to-date about all the latest news. But indeed, I think there's many interesting things I work on which have a connection to what we're going to be talking today. So let's hope that works out. But how I came from econometrics to the Circular Finance Lab, I started my career as a risk consultant, so I made risk models for financial institutions. And after a few years of doing that, I started this permaculture education, which you already mentioned, which I think was a very important moment in my life. Permaculture is, it comes from the words permanent agriculture. And it's about designing ecosystems, actually productive agricultural systems, which are as diverse, as resilient as natural ecosystems. To give an example, in the Netherlands, if you do nothing, nature will create a forest. So what permaculture designers do is designing an ecosystem, such as a forest, that's also productive for human beings. So producing food, producing water, producing energy, producing clothing, all those things. And the interesting thing about permaculture is that it's not only... it's based on design principles, and it works as a compass, rather than having prescriptive rules on a map, for example. It guides you in the right direction. So therefore, it actually works in many different contexts. So if you apply the permaculture principles in the Netherlands, you create a food forest. Well, oftentimes, if that's your goal. But if you would do the same thing in Egypt, something different would emerge. But it's still a diverse, resilient ecosystem. So that made me wonder, what am I doing in this financial system? working with the primary things in life, such as food, living, basic things. How does my work relate to that? And I realized there's a big gap between financial transactions and the real economy, where the real stuff happens. So that made me actually change my course. And I've worked almost 8 years afterwards for different organizations on financing the circular economy, doing a lot of research. What's the circular economy? What will it look like in the future? And how should the financial system adapt or transform to fit to such a circular future? And that's where we arrive this year. I founded my own company, which is organized as a cooperative and is called Circular Finance Lab. And what we do is working with front-running businesses that change their business model towards circularity, and with financial institutions to change their core processes to integrate circularity as well.
And for people who aren't familiar with this whole circularity concept yet, could you just explain briefly what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. The easiest way to explain, I always think, is explaining the linear economy in which we currently are. This is about taking resources from the ground, making products out of them, and after a super short lifetime, we throw them away and we pollute the environment at the same time. The business model behind this linear economy is selling as many products as possible that are nearly broken. And what the circular economy is about is changing this fundamentally. For example, by not selling products anymore, but selling the function of a product. Think of selling light rather than a lamp. When you do this, a producer suddenly really needs to rethink its product. Because if you sell light and you're responsible of the lamps, responsible of repairing and maintaining these lamps to, light all the time, and when you're responsible to take it back at the end of the lifetime, you suddenly need to redesign your lamp to be as durable and sustainable as possible, because the longer it functions, the more you earn. But this is a very difficult concept for businesses, but also for financiers, because it's really radically different than how we do business at the moment. And so that's where I work on with financiers to make them understand that we have to have a more long-term vision and change the way we operate. But at the same time, I do believe that if we really want to transform finance for the circular future, we also need to look at more radical financial innovation. And that's, we do this in a project called the Circular Service Platform, which is also a blockchain-based platform, and that more radically changes the relationship between producers, consumers, and financiers, actually. So that's a bit about circular finance, what I'm working on currently.
Thanks. So, Kevin, I'm very curious about if there are things that Elisa just told that sort of connect to your work and to the idea behind Gitcoin.
Yeah. Well, really fascinating to learn about permaculture through getting into the Regen Web3 movement. I feel like I've been learning a lot about materials and physical science, and it's just really inspiring the work that's being done in that area. And, I think that the way it connects to what I would call the Regen Web3 movement, the regenerative crypto movement, is that we're basically trying to build bridges between different types of capital. Web3 and blockchain is known as financial capital, but there's also social capital and spiritual capital and experiential capital and material capital. And I think that if we can build a more regenerative cycle between our financial capital and the material capital and social capital, then that's gonna be how crypto can help regenerate the world. So I don't know if I like the word "save the planet" because it invokes maybe a much higher task than I think what crypto in its current form is able to do. But we can at least start thinking about how crypto could start regenerating the world if we can build monetary systems and economies that reflect local values instead of just global New York kind of capitalist values. And so I think that that's how crypto intersects with what Elisa said. But I'd love to hear the feedback from the other side of the podium.
Great.
Yeah, I was thinking I forgot to make the link to regenerative actually, because that was also what we discussed in beforehand. Because I think regenerative economy is actually asking the question, how? Well, that's my definition. So I would love to hear from you, Kevin, how you do this, because all those capitals are very, very important, and one of the building blocks, I think, of a regenerative economy. But the question regenerative economics asks is, how would nature build economy? Or how would nature build finance? And in that sense, we shouldn't confuse actually the circular economy metaphor with how living systems actually work. And I've done a great course from John Fullerton. I can really recommend it. It's a course called Regenerative Economics. And there actually he says regenerative economics is based on 3 premises. The first is our human economy is a living system. Second is there are patterns and principles that explain or describe how these living systems work. These are very similar to the permaculture principles I've learned. And the third is, if we want to build a sustainable human economy in the long run, it needs to adhere to those principles. So that's actually, and therefore the circular economy is only part of it. So we need healthy circulatory flow through our economies, but we need more than only that, because if we have using polluting plastics, you know, it has nowhere to go. We need healthy inputs, healthy outputs. And for every cycle a product makes, we lose energy, which has a limit. So circulatory flows are important, but only a subset actually of a regenerative economy.
Thanks for adding.
Yeah.
Kevin, I'm maybe already curious about your part of the presentation, in which you will also dive a little bit deeper into the crypto and the regenerative part of that. Yeah, would you be so kind to share that with us?
Yeah, definitely. I know we were having some IT issues earlier, so I can share my screen, or I think that they're going to pull it up there. Is that right?
Yeah, they're gonna share your slides here.
Okay. Right now, I see the title. Okay, there we go. All right, we got the slides up. Amazing. If you wouldn't mind paging ahead a slide, that'd be great. Cool. So, hey everyone, I'm Kevin Owocki. I have a computer science degree from University of Delaware in 2006. And I've been a CTO and lead engineer at several Web2 startups for the last 15 years or so. And I started Gitcoin in 2017, which is a place that you can get coins if you work in Web3. It's the #1 crowdfunding platform in the Web3 space. And I think that's why I'm qualified to talk to you about crypto here today. Can we go to the next slide, please? The presentation title that I put together is The Whole Elephant. And the idea here is, if you go to the next slide, basically there's this parable of the blind men and the elephant, in which you've got a couple different blind men who are trying to figure out what an elephant is. And the person who feels the trunk says, "Oh, is this a snake?" And the person who feels the foot says, "Oh, is this a wall?" Or the person who feels the back and feels the tail says, "Oh, this must be a rope." And the whole parable is designed to say that we're not actually sensing the whole elephant when we're trying to just feel what the elephant is. There's actually a bigger concept here that needs to be grasped. And if we go to the next slide, the allegory here is in Web3. It's like some of my font sizes didn't transfer, but that's okay. Basically, when people hear about crypto and Web3, they hear, oh, I hear there's a lot of scams there, or that it's very volatile. And they also hear more positive things like, oh, is it the future of art funding or online organizations? And what I would like to do is create a solid grounding in the audience's mind of what is the whole elephant of Web3? And then we can start to apply that to how can we save the world with crypto, or how can we regenerate the world with crypto? So if you take me to the next slide, one of the perceptions of the elephant that people in the audience may have heard about, next slide please, is this idea that crypto is very volatile. So you've got Bitcoin, which started off sub $1 and then went up to $1,000 and then back down to $200 and then up to $20,000. And then, so this volatility is something that crypto is really famous for. And what you're seeing here, I think, is the bootstrapping of a new open source financial system. But if you're only grasping that part of the elephant, you might just see, oh, it's very volatile. Next slide, please. The next thing that a lot of people hear, especially when they're very negative on crypto, is the idea that there's a lot of scams there. So if you take me to the next slide, then we could kind of talk about some of those. And there are legitimately scams in the Web3 space that people should be wary of. Things like BitConnect, which was basically just a Ponzi scheme that reached several $billion worth of capital and then dumped to zero when people found out what they were up to. Next slide. Terra Luna also went to zero, and their main product was a stable coin, which was supposed to be worth $1, and within 36 hours, it went from $1 down to $0. Can you imagine putting your life savings in a stable coin that went to $0? It's really bad look for the space to have things like Terra Luna being the things that are making headline on behalf of the space. If we go to the next slide, we could maybe talk to another part of the elephant, which is maybe a little bit more positive and aspirational, which is Web3 the future of finance? Next slide, please. So one of the ideas here is that with Bitcoin, which is sort of the apex predator, the keystone species of crypto coins, there will only be 21 million Bitcoins. And the idea here is that if you live in a part of the world where your monetary system is being inflated by government spending, like say Argentina, and you have 70% deflation year over year, then you could put your money in Bitcoin and not have to worry about the government debasing your currency. Next slide. There's also this idea that Bitcoin is transforming remittances across the world. Billions of dollars in remittances going across the Bitcoin crypto economic network as opposed to the legacy networks like Western Union, which charge way more of a fee. Next slide. And then there's also the people who think that cryptocurrencies via ICOs are going to be the future of finance. So things like Ethereum and Bancor and Filecoin have really done some foundational things in the Web3 space, but then you also get the kind of ICOs that never really go anywhere, like DentaCoin, the coin for dentists. So if you go to the next slide, you will see that, okay, so we're starting to talk about the whole elephant here with Web3. And there's one other part of the elephant that I want to show you before we talk about the whole thing, and that's NFTs. So if you take me to the next slide, hopefully many people in the audience have heard of NFTs over the last, they're kind of what drove the market cycle the last year. People raised $70 million for their NFT the first 5,000 days. Next slide. You're also starting to see people who are involved in geopolitics raise money for their legal defense via NFT. Ross Ulbricht, the founder of Silk Road, has raised several $1 million for his legal defense via NFTs. Next slide. We've also seen political dissidents like Edward Snowden raise $6 million to fund their work in NFTs. Next slide. And then there's also just kind of like fun artistic stuff like Xcopy, and if you take me to the next slide, you can also see CryptoPunks that are raising on the order of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars for really just JPEGs that are ownable by people on the internet. So if you go to the next slide, then that's basically, I think, the different like parts of the elephant that the audience might have heard about. And I want to zoom out and talk about the whole elephant, because I think that that's when it gets really interesting about how can we build a regenerative economy or a biomimicry economy that helps regenerate the world. So if you take me to the next slide, like the core foundational idea here is with Web3 and with crypto is that money is just a content type. So if you use the web and you load a website and you send an HTTP request in order to get that website and you get some information back, then that's an example of information being put across the internet. But the idea with Web3 is that money is just something that can be sent across the internet, just like information in bits. So if we go to the next slide, I think there's a lot of parallels between the Internet of Information, which basically allows computers to send information across a computer network, which radically changed anything in society that relies on information, like entertainment, media, and politics. We didn't even have social media before the Internet of Information. And the big idea with the Internet of Money is computers can now send value across a computer network, and that could radically alter anything in society that relies on value transfer, whether that's banking, or insurance, or art, or finance, or the way jobs are created. How can we create economies that look fundamentally different with the Internet of Money, just like the Internet of Information has changed how we route information in society? So if you go to the next slide, the primary thing that was solved in Web3 that allowed us to get to this place where value could be sent across the computer network is this game theoretic problem of the Byzantine generals problem, which I won't go into here, but I just want people to be aware of it, that there was fundamental research that enabled Web3 to allow us to send value across a computer network and imbue scarcity into that value. So Google the Byzantine generals problem if you want to know how Web3 solved that problem. If we move forward one slide, I think the big idea here, and I want to go back to Elisa in a sec here, is basically we have this design space that's been enabled by Bitcoin and crypto solving of the Byzantine generals problem, which is that we have a global, which just means that it touches everyone on Earth, as opposed to our national currencies, which can only be accessed within our borders. Immutable, which basically means that no one can tamper with it, from everyday citizens to investment bankers. Transparent, which means that everyone has equal access to it from any part of the world, regardless of whether you work on Wall Street or if you just have an internet connection, everyone has access to it. Programmable, which means that you can program smart contracts and that you can build logical flows into your money. Financial system. So what could we build with a global, immutable, transparent, and programmable financial system? That is the design space that I think that we're here to talk about when we talk about how crypto could one day maybe save the world or regenerate the world. And I think that the non-skeuomorphic ideas here are the ones that are especially interesting. So what is skeuomorphism? Skeuomorphism is the idea that the analog reflects the digital. And the best way to explain skeuomorphism is to talk about Yahoo and Google, which both had the mission to organize the world's information. But on Yahoo, they just took the library card catalog system and put it online so that if you wanted to look for, say, the Brainwash Festival, you would have to go down their directory and look at arts festivals and then go to Amsterdam and then find the Brainwash Festival. Whereas with Google, they invented a fundamentally new interface that allowed you to approach the information, and you just type in Brainwash Festival into Google and then you get the new information. So Google is a non-skeuomorphic example of the internet, and Yahoo is a skeuomorphic example of the internet. What are the non-skeuomorphic financial systems that we could build in order to regenerate the world with crypto? So if you take me to the next slide, I don't think I have time to cover this. So take me 2 slides ahead, please. So basically, I think that the most interesting question here is, okay, so we've talked about the whole elephant. You understand from first principles that Web3 allows us to send value across a computer network. And what can we do with this? What can we do in order to regenerate the world using this knowledge now that we've grasped, or at least started to grasp, the whole elephant of what Web3 and crypto is? And I think that that's what I'd love to spend the rest of the time with you talking, Tonya and Elisa, is how can we use these primitives of a transparent, global, immutable financial system that's programmable by anyone in their local economy to regenerate the planet, to save the world, to create a better resource consumption for humanity. And I love the way that you put it. How would nature design an economy? I think that's such an elegant way for us to shoot at this. So we can stop sharing my slides now, and I would love to just enter into a discussion for the remainder of the time of what do we do with these primitives of a open source, transparent, immutable, global financial system. So I think it's a really exciting design space, and thanks for inviting me to share my thoughts.
Thanks, Kevin. Super interesting. There was one part that I'm also interested in, which is which you skipped because of the time, but yeah, we can discuss it here as well, which is the decentralized autonomous organizations. There was a thought that I find fascinating. Like, can you have a group of people together that can vote and have a say in where certain flows of money could go to? Could you elaborate maybe a little bit on that, Kevin?
Sorry, just about DAOs specifically?
Yeah, how it works, and also to create this new system.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the idea of DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. I know that sounds scary, but just think of it as like a digital organization, something that a company is domiciled in a legal jurisdiction. So if you have a company in Amsterdam, you're domiciled in the EU and in your local jurisdiction. And the ideas with DAOs is that it's just domiciled on Ethereum or on a blockchain. So that means that any dispute resolution or resource allocation within a DAO is basically sovereign to the Ethereum blockchain instead of sovereign to the physical fiat economy within the EU or in the United States in my example. So what can you build now that you've got digital organizations on top of the blockchain? Well, you can build things that are global. So basically, like, we could be in a DAO together even though we're all the way across the world from each other, whereas we'd have to be in the same state in order to really be in a company together if we both wanted to have same access to the rule of law in order to enforce our agreements. You can build programmable governance into your DAOs because that's what blockchain allows, and anyone can access it from anywhere. So it's the transparency. These are the properties of the blockchain that are brought into DAOs. And then you can start to build things that don't look like a corporation, like don't have shareholder value imbued as their core organizing principle. What would it look like to build DAOs that are just governed by token holders or governed by the community that they serve, or use more advanced forms of collective intelligence and organizing in order to do their resource allocation? So the design space of DAOs is exploding, and to talk about DAOs is like talking about companies. Like, the aperture of the design space is so wide, and there's a lot possible. And so it's almost hard to talk about DAOs because they're all so different from each other. And but it's a really interesting design space. And I could talk more about DAOs, but I'd be curious what others think.
Yeah, no, I'm curious because so if we would think a DAO being a system where you could possibly change something for the good. Let's say I would want to invest or fund something. Let's say a solar panel company. Mm-hmm. To invest my money in there. What would be different in being a stakeholder in just this kind of company in comparison to when you would be part of the DAO and have it structured in that way?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think before you ask like what's different about a DAO, you have to ask why would I want this to be a DAO instead of a company? Yeah. So, I mean, I think that if you have people participating from many different jurisdictions across the world, then it might make sense to domicile it as a DAO so everyone has the same access to things. I do think that, if there's benefits to tokenization, then you would want to be a DAO. And I don't think that, if you're investing in a solar panel venture, which I think was the example that you gave, then it doesn't make any sense to be a DAO because there's no advantages to a DAO over a company for that investment vehicle. But say you're working on, open source software and you've got contributors from 7 countries across the world. It might make sense to incorporate that venture as a DAO because it's global in nature and it's building on the blockchain. So I think before you ask what is a DAO, you have to ask why would you want to be a DAO? And I think things that are global in nature, things that need decentralization or credible neutrality are the things that you would want to make into a DAO. Your solar panel venture probably isn't a good idea to make into a DAO.
Yeah, okay. Elisa, do you see within your work that DAO could be something you would work with? Yes or no?
Well, I like this answer very much. Why would you want to be a DAO? Yeah. I think that's in general the best question to ask I think regarding technology is, what do you want the world to look like first? And then design technology that can actually enable that which you want to reach, actually. And I think that's an important thing when also thinking about regenerative economy. First, we have to, I think, envision what that world looks like. What do we want it to be? How do we want it to look like? And to be honest, lately, I'm very ambivalent when I think about technology. Because in my experience, if you increasingly become dependent on nature, land immediately around you, if you eat plants from the land where you live, for example, it becomes increasingly difficult to treat the environment the way we do. And the same thing is happening more and more. I don't know if you share my experience. I would really love to hear about it. But my work is on my laptop mostly, so digital in a virtual world. Of course, I meet people in real life, but it's all very, very detached from my immediate surroundings. That makes me wanting to close my computer. I quitted WhatsApp more and more because I really feel that what I value most in life is not there. Is my near and dear ones, is food, water, air, being outside, being with people, giving, living and giving. And I feel that it's technology is somehow distracting us, I think, or disconnecting us from that more and more. Although I do agree, I mean, I see a lot of very interesting things happening in this space at the same time. But, one of the permaculture principles is use small and slow solutions. I was pondering on the permaculture principles today because we had this talk. And I was like, oh yeah, that's one of the principles that, I don't see yet how these come together, or somehow for me they feel like very separate. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering how you and how Kevin thinks about that.
Yeah,
Maybe
well,
Kevin?
first off, I'll say that I empirically feel the exact same thing. After I get off this Zoom meeting, I'm going to go for a walk in nature, in the sunshine, in the fresh air, and the trees and everything are going to reinvigorate me. And I do feel the same when I step outside and I use technology. And one of the things I think that over the last 20 years or so, we've kind of been Web 2 has been the technological paradigm that we've been in, and the rise of advertising-based financial models has basically means that the software companies and hardware companies are trying to absorb more and more attention so that they can make more and more money from people. And they do it in such a way that they publish content that grabs our attention. And there's been the rise of clickbait over the last 10 years. There's been the rise of this concept of the race to the bottom of the brainstem, where social networks have figured out that if they enrage you, they can get you to spend more time on site. So basically, you've kind of got this extractive attentional model that's driving a lot of how technology has evolved, and it's driven by this advertising-based business model. And I think that it's not best for the happiness of the participants of humanity to have their attention sucked into rage and into clickbait, but it's the most profitable thing. And so a lot of Web3, I think, is about creating new financial models where we could say, create a local economy with its own local currency, and we could say, this financial system values permaculture, or this financial system values open source software. By the way, my main project, Gitcoin, is a local political economy, not geolocal, but like local to the value set of supporting open source software. So basically, if you can program your values into your money, what alternatives to the ad model could you create? And could you create little sort of like safe spaces or shelters where local values are entrusted instead of just like this global capitalist attention-sucking machine pulling everything into dollars via advertising. So I don't know, that's how I connect to the problems, but I'd be curious if that resonates with you at all.
Thanks.
Yeah, makes sense. To me, the race to the bottom of our brainstem, I mean, I love it. It's happening. Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's what Web3 can add, right? To make it actually more controllable.
Yep.
Maybe smaller, maybe simpler even, although it is more complex.
Simple is good. Yeah.
Right?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think there's some latency. I was just saying simple is good.
One of the questions that also, but maybe this is what the, how do you call it, the thing of the elephant, the front part of the elephant that you were mentioning, Kevin, is that a lot of people, of course, heard about crypto being very pollutive in a way as well. So sort of how can it then save the planet? Could you update us on that? Is it still as pollutive as it was in the beginning? What's up with that?
Yeah. Blockchains are secured with consensus algorithms, the most famous of which is proof of work, where you basically have computers that are doing a bunch of different expensive hashing functions in order to secure the cryptocurrency. And Bitcoin still uses proof of work, and Bitcoin still, if it were a country, it'd be a top 50 country by energy consumption. But there are other blockchains like the Ethereum network that have moved to proof of stake, which is 99.995% less energy consumptive of proof of work. And so I think that if you want to have a carbon neutral ledger or a near carbon neutral ledger, then Ethereum or other proof of stake networks are a better use of your time, capital, and scarce resources if you want to minimize carbon outputs. And then from there, the idea becomes, what could we do in order to coordinate things that are good for the world, like say tracking carbon credits using blockchains, and then we take blockchains from being like net neutral for carbon to being net negative and create carbon sinks with blockchain-based networks. So I guess the short answer to your question is, with proof of stake, Ethereum is 99.995% less energy consumptive, and hopefully people will give it another look now that it's not consuming so much energy.
Clear. Is your the thing that you're working on with the blockchain, is it also on Ethereum or?
Yes, it's based on Ethereum.
Yep.
It's using Quorum, but don't ask me the technical details, please. I just know what it does and why it does so. But maybe we should actually try to get some crowdfunding for it via gitcoin. Would that be a use case you would consider, Kevin?
Yeah. Well, the magic of Gitcoin is that it doesn't matter what I think. Gitcoin's a channel for greater combinations of strength and intelligence to come together, and we fund projects that support the public good and regenerate the world. So it really matters what the crowd thinks of your project, not what I think. But
awesome.
yes, Gitcoin is a great place to raise capital, I think because of that.
Yeah. No, but I always get nervous when people start asking me about the technological details. But that made me think of something else because, my background is in econometrics. It's quite a good basis actually to start when you look into blockchain. I mean, it's a combination of economics, maths, game theory, finance, monetary theory. I all, learned about it, and still I find it quite complicated stuff.
Yep.
How can we create this regenerative system or ecosystem on Web3, but make it for everyone, rather than creating, this new elite of knowers and not knowers? How do we prevent that the institutions we design become corrupted?
Oh man. I don't know if we have enough time to get into this.
I find it interesting.
I'm just throwing, all my fundamental questions inside of me onto you, Kevin. I'm sorry about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that those are really important questions. I don't think we're going to be able to cover it all in the next 5 minutes, but I do think that, but by the way, like I wrote a book called Green Pilled: How Crypto Can Regenerate the World, and the last page of my presentation is a free copy of the book. So maybe we can get that distributed out to the audience and actually cover some of this in the book. But you know, I think that blockchains are 10 years old, and you know, when the internet was 10 years old, you had to be really technocratic to use it. You had to get a dial-up modem, you had to get an ISP, you had to know how to use a web browser, and but you know, it matured to the point where we all have a smartphone in our pocket, and internet access is relatively more distributed. I wouldn't say all the way available to everyone. And you know, the internet is now 30 or 40 years old, and I think it's that point of maturity that I would love to see the Web3 space get to, so that it's accessible to anyone, not just someone with a computer science degree. And admittedly, we have a long way to go. And this is, by the way, the book that I wrote is called How Crypto Could Regenerate the World, not How Crypto is Regenerating the World, because I think that we have to rotate capital and talent into regenerating the world with crypto and making it fairer and easier to access before we can really make that claim. So I think there's great potential energy to make it happen in Web3, but the actual kinetic energy of making it happen is something that we're going to have to solve together over the next decade.
True, agree, and thanks for the tip. Definitely gonna read the book.
Yeah, that's a good one. I should try it as well. I mean, that was what I was thinking as well. If you're not familiar with crypto, it seems like such a vast world with so many things that you should know of before you could really start, and also start doing it in a good way, without sort of, investing in the wrong things. We have 4 minutes left, and I'm very curious if there is someone in the audience who's maybe has a question. And also for whom?
Hi, I'm Sven. I have a question for both speakers, Kevin. And so I was wondering, and you were talking about regenerative economy, and the thing with let's say the regenerative part in nature is everything dies at the end, and then it returns back in a new life form. And I was wondering, how could Web3 solutions, let's say, count in that value actually disappears but returns in a new life form in some sorts? Do you have any ideas on that?
Beautiful question.
Beautiful, difficult question. Well, I think, when something dies, it still has value. In nature, at least. It has value. But there's also, at the same time, the difficulty of, you can value it, you can maybe even define it, but how you cannot put a price on it. So that's, I think, the difficulty in general about, valuing ecosystem services. I haven't answered this question myself as well, like how to go about it. But I think, you should, I think, account for this. I mean, a tree grows, and you expect it to be a big tree in 500 years. So it's part of, so you need to plan. You design the system and you plan for it. So it will provide space when it dies, but it provides wood when it lives. It's part of the design plan. So I think it's part of designing a regenerative system to know this, to look at it, to value it. But I don't know.
I also do have to think about this circularity concept, because they also say there's no waste in a circular economy. So in that sense, if you would have, I don't know, textile waste, for example, you would give it a certain amount of, I don't know, value, and then use that value to revalue it again in another chain part of the circularity.
Yeah, exactly. It regenerates the soil. So it in all forms it has value, actually. But the connection with Web3, I leave the question to Kevin.
Yeah, I do think that that's a really interesting observation, and I love that we got there by sense making together how would nature build finance. And I do think that, you know, in nature maybe has this mechanism of natural selection in which there's an evolutionary way that organisms evolve and create a relation with their environment. And one of the things I see in nature is that and this isn't true in all ecosystems, but in many ecosystems, when you have a keystone species, or you have a species that interoperates with the rest of its ecosystem and performs a function for the rest of its ecosystem and is in balance with the rest of its ecosystem, that's an evolutionarily advantaged strategy. And you know, the things that don't fit into that natural selection mechanism are going to die off, and then that is what allows the resources to be consumed by the next organism that comes along. And you know, the mirror that I see between the evolution of nature via natural selection is the evolution of Web3 via market selection. And so basically, we've been going through these epochs of fear and greed and boom and bust in the Web3 ecosystem since Bitcoin, and it's out of the Byzantine generals' problem that we have this Cambrian explosion of an ecosystem that created non-state money, non-censorable money, and then Ethereum evolved, and we have programmable money, and then DAOs evolved from that, and NFTs evolved from that, and it's all through this market selection that capital is allocated to the next projects, and then the ones that die off, that capital gets siphoned into the next epoch's evolutionary niche, and so. Yeah, I don't know. I just see the symmetry there, and I think that it's a good point that we should be channeling talent and capital to the things. I think what I take is that we should channel capital and talent to things that are good keystone species and interoperate and in harmony with the rest of their ecosystem, because I think that that's where it eventually evolve over time. But it's going to take a lot of failed projects to get there, which in your parlance would be dead projects, maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's of course a GDP growth question you ask also. We should maybe design businesses to die off eventually. I mean, if the market is saturated, why not design our business to stop? I mean, yeah, in terms of economics. Interesting
Beautiful.
question.
Is there anyone else who would? I see someone there who has a question. That'll be the last one also.
I first have a question. Can we see the link for your book? Because I was actually quite interested. It was the last page of the PowerPoint. But that's separate. That's for control here. The other question is, isn't the rise of the DAOs and the new financial system, aren't you afraid that at some point regular politics and jurisdiction is going to come in and just going to get control? Because at the end of the day, that has happened for the past 3,000 years. So I don't really see how this time it could be different.
Great question. So I'll take the first one first. If whoever is running the IT, if you could put my presentation back up and put slide 40 up, then that'll be a QR code where people can download the book for free. So I don't know if we're able to do that. But with respect to the second question, which I kind of perceived as, won't states catch up to blockchains and start censoring them or shutting them down? I think that this is why people are really interested in decentralization. So,
it's not about censoring, it's about basically getting control back. But because the DAO, I mean, at the end of the day, you're doing a jurisdiction outside of a regular country, which they're going to stop at some point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is the idea behind decentralization, is that I can run an ETH node in Colorado, and if Colorado bans Web3, then there's still thousands of nodes across jurisdictions in the world. So there could be a coordinated effort from governments across all 250 governments to ban Web3 and to ban access to them. But I think that it's smarter for these jurisdictions to compete for innovation and for being on the bleeding edge of these markets as opposed to banning them. But each jurisdiction will make their own choice, and it's possible that the world that you talk about there will come to fruition, and it'll just mean that we don't have open source money. It'll mean that we have only state issued currencies.
Thank you. And I've also heard that it's... Oh, was there something
sorry.
last?
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say I don't know if the link to the book ever made
It
up
worked.
on the screen.
And people are,
it did, okay.
are very
Cool.
busy scanning your QR code, so that's great.
Okay, cool. Making sure.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that being said, I want to thank you, Elisa and Kevin, for being here with me. And I think you in the audience have enough to read and listen to with the green pill. So thank you for being here, and enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you for moderating.
Thanks for moderating. Great to see everyone. Wish I could be there in person, hopefully next year.